A very good morning to all present. This is Dr. Neeta Pruthi, and it's my proud privilege to welcome you all to this national webinar on cracking the research code, tips, tricks, tools, and techniques, which is jointly organized by IQAC, Internal Quality Assurance Cell, and Research Cell of our college. So, before introducing our resource person, let me express my sincere gratitude to our principal sir, Dr. Rajesh Kumar Mahajan, for providing us this opportunity, for inspiring us, for motivating us always to conduct such activities. Thank you, sir. And now it's time to introduce our resource person, Professor Manu Mangatu. So I feel extremely honored to introduce our resource person, who is an English professor, poet, lyricist, editor, research consultant, and publishing expert. He has published 9 books, 79 international research publications, 97 academic papers, and 20 edited volumes with reputed publishers. He serves as chief editor for various international journals and is on syllabus revision and approval committees of many reputed universities. A poet at heart who would live and die for art, he writes poetry in English and several Indian languages and also finds delight in doing translations from Chinese, Persian, and Sanskrit. The Chinese poetry conglomerate acknowledged his contributions in taking Chinese poetry to the Western world by naming him Comrade to Poetry China, a visiting faculty at various universities, including the very prestigious Harvard University. He conducts poetry readings, workshops, and lectures. He currently offers part-time guidance to several research scholars from India, Iran, Australia, Indonesia, etc. Apart from this, he also plies his trade in film and publishing industry. So cutting it short, hoping for a wonderful talk ahead. So over to you, Professor Manu Mangatu. Sir, please.
Good morning, one and all. Thank you, ma'am, for your nice, brief words of invitation and welcome and introduction. Respected principal of the college, Professor Dr. Mahajan, dear members of the IQAC and the research cell, other faculty from the college, the members from the management, the research scholars, students, teachers, researchers who are here attending this lecture on various platforms, whether it be on Google Meet or on YouTube live streaming. A very pleasant good morning to each one of you. Today's lecture is titled Cracking the Research Code, Tips, Tricks, Tools and Techniques. Now, I would like you to look at the first part of our title, cracking the research code. What is it about cracking codes? I guess the YouTube link will be shared by the organizers. Yes, that's available. They will provide you. So, cracking the research. How can we crack a code? Ever since the evolution of mankind, ever since man or human race developed language, we have used codes and ciphers to obscure our messages. We don't want others to read our messages. We want only a certain select people to read our messages, and that is when we use ciphers or codes to convey our message. And this has been in practice, this has been done ever since mankind evolved some means of communication. We wanted to hide our means of communication, to obscure our messages. The Greeks and the Egyptians, for example, they used codes to transfer private communications in early 2500 and 3000 BC, forming the, and we can call them the pioneers of modern coding and code breaking and password hacking, all these code related things, the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians. And interestingly, when we came to the world wars, a lot of war was fought on the ground, but a lot of war was fought among the technicians as well. There were a lot of codes being deployed, and the world wars witnessed an unprecedented deployment and destruction not only of soldiers but also of codes. We know how the armies and the intelligence agencies these days use scripts and codes to communicate. I am speaking about codes, I am not speaking about research. Listen, it's about codes, C-O-D-E, code. What is a code? That is what I am trying to tell you. Our generation, if you look at what our generation, people of the late 20th and early 21st century, we have learned and enjoyed codes thanks to mainly fiction, thanks to people like Dan Brown, who wrote such famous novels like the Da Vinci Code, but also we have seen codes in connection with computers. Whenever we are unable to load a particular page on computer, we will find some code on the internet, on some code, some unintelligible language, something that is very difficult to understand. So we are familiar with these codes, and in our school and college magazines and stuff, we have seen a lot of codes. We have solved a lot of codes from the childhood days, show the way codes, to the puzzles, to the crosswords. We have seen a lot of codes and we have solved a lot of codes. To begin with, this lecture is not ostensibly a lecture on codes or crypts. I am not here to speak about codes. I will be using the metaphor of cracking codes right through this lecture as the framework to understand and appreciate the various facets of research. Yes, this lecture is about research. Research in the arts and humanities, research in the social sciences, research in the sciences. We will be discussing things related to writing, academic writing, submitting, publishing research papers. We will be discussing plagiarism, tools for research, H-index, this index, that index, about finding the best journals, about the tips and tricks to make research a friendly, enjoyable, and highly rewarding habit. Research as a habit. That is what we are trying to inculcate through this lecture. Now, what is this connection between codes and cracking codes and research? Why am I speaking? Why did I begin my lecture speaking about codes? I have 15 points, and I don't know whether I will be able to take you through all the 15 points, but we will try. I have 15 points where I will be telling you about the association, the similarities, the connection between decoding on the one hand and research on the other hand. And all the while our focus will be on research, but we will be using this coding system as a framework, a different way of understanding what this research is all about. So the first similarity, the obvious similarity, both research and codes started with the evolution of language and systems of communication. Before man could communicate, there was no research, there was no code. So some form of language, and that was where research began. Secondly, research is fun for some while it is survival for some others. Research scholars tell us, they often complain that for my supervisor, for my guide, research is fun. He doesn't help me, he doesn't do anything, he laughs at my proposal, he laughs at my abstract, he cuts and tears and throws away my papers. For him it is fun, for her it is fun. I am struggling, I am struggling for breath, I am struggling to survive in this academic curriculum. And research supervisors on the other hand say, oh, I'm tired of my scholars. They take research for fun, they don't read the MLA, they don't read the research guidelines, and they submit some trash. For them it is fun, I am struggling. So for some people it is a chord, it is fun, and for some others it is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of survival. And both research and coding have a lot to do with war-like situations. What is it? Research is a war, right? Research is a war for survival in the academic world. And thirdly, about coding, until you crack a code, it looks meaningless and senseless. When you look at a code, it is utterly meaningless, it is utterly senseless, it doesn't make any meaning. But once you crack a code, everything makes perfect sense. It's a quest, and at the end of this quest, if you are able to solve the code, there is a conquest, a quest that ends in a conquest. For a beginner, research is confusing, utterly perplexing. Methodology, techniques look meaningless. The instructions of the supervisor and the rules of the university all look entirely senseless. And fourthly, I'm just introducing you to the idea of coding and research. Fourthly, to crack codes, you have to be informed and updated. Because people who are in NASA, or people who are in intelligence agencies like RAW, for example, they have to be updated, and they spend almost 13-14 hours every day to update themselves on the latest happenings in the world, because only then they can decode, decrypt encrypted codes. And it is important for us as researchers to spend a lot of time on getting informed and updated, because a lot are happening and there are a lot of traps, there are a lot of pits and dangerous pitfalls everywhere in the world of research. We find every other day we hear about some researcher falling prey to some fake journal, publishing in some fake journal, or paying money to some agent and unable to publish. Lot of problems. So we need to be updated and informed about the UGC care lists, Scopus, fake journals, what is plagiarism, how to avoid plagiarism. Keeping updated and informed, very important. Now my fifth point, now I am getting to some serious matter. The operation of a code. How does a code operate? It usually depends on a piece of auxiliary information, on a piece of secondary information, which is equally important or perhaps more important than the code, and that is the key. For every code, there is a key. It is only by using this key you can unlock or decode the crypt, the cipher. So decoding is about finding out the key. A key must be selected before using a cipher, a code, to encrypt a message. Without knowledge of that key, it should be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to decrypt the resulting cipher text into some readable, understandable, interpretable, intelligible matter. Now, in the world of academic writing also, we need keys. There are certain keys that will help us crack the code of academic writing. I will not go into details, but I will just point out three major keys. One is the language key. Whether you are from the arts and humanities or from the sciences or from the social sciences, a grip over the language is very important for you to successfully do your research. Linguistic skills are necessary because you have to communicate. After all, whether you are doing research in science or humanities, you have to communicate your idea. And more than language people, arts and humanities people, where science people really struggle, what I have observed is when it comes to language. I don't say science people are bad at language, that is not my idea. What I am saying is they do research extraordinarily well, and they feel that it is not very important to focus on the language part. I may be making a very categorical umbrella statement, maybe I am wrong, but I feel that science people most often, when they fail to get their articles accepted by journals, it largely happens because of the language problems that they face. And when we speak about, many people approach me saying that my article, my thesis, it says that the plagiarism software says that my thesis is plagiarized, but my research is original. I haven't copied anything from anywhere, but still my research is shown as 40% or 45% plagiarized. This is absolutely original research. This is what science people usually tell us. And when we go through their proposal, we find that they have done research, proper research. Then why do they fall into the trap of plagiarism? Because there are certain aspects of research which requires you to write a lot. For example, think about the literature review. Even in science papers, you have to do a literature review. It has nothing to do with literature. Literature review is reviewing existing literature, existing research on that particular area. But the problem is, when you have to write that, you need to have, if you don't have good language command, if you are not very good at paraphrasing ideas and making it your own or presenting it in a convincing manner, what will happen is that chapter on research, literature review will spoil your entire research. Why? Because it will be shown as plagiarized. But you are saying, no, I have given citation, I have put it in the bibliography, and still they are saying I am plagiarizing. I am not. And even in the methodology part, yes, a scientist, a social scientist does his research very honestly. But what happens, because of certain technical terminology and certain, for example, you are using a tool, SPSS or this or that tool is being used. So those terminology associated with that tool will be the same. Wherever you do research, those terminology will be the same. And all plagiarism softwares will detect that as plagiarized, as similarity. And that is where we fall into a big crisis. And so it is important for us to have a good command over the language. First key. The second key is the technological key, the computer key, the internet key. Without computers, without internet, it is becoming increasingly impossible for us to either do research, a lot of materials come from the internet, or to communicate our research, because a lot of transactions happen online through email, and get it rectified. So we need a lot of computer and internet related, I would call, technological skills. So the second key to open or to crack the academic writing code is technological. And the third key is research key. What is the research key? We need to know about research. We need to know about research methodology. We need to know about tools and techniques and methods and the format of a research paper, how to write, how not to write, these things. So what I am saying is, these three keys are invariably inevitable for any researcher. In the world of academic writing, we need these three keys: the language key, the technological key, and the research key. And if you use these three keys together to unlock, you will be able to crack the research code. These three keys are necessary. In bank lockers, we have multiple keys. The third key is the research key. Research key in the sense research methodology, how to do research. That is the third key. So the three keys: language key, technological key, and research key. Research key, I'm using the same word, but research key, by research key what I mean is whatever you need to know about research. For example, about research style, you need to know about citation styles, those kind of research things. So when you use these three keys simultaneously in a proper manner, you will be able to unlock the code of academic writing. Now, that was my fifth connection between research and coding. Sixth one, this is going to be an elaborate one. Here, I would like to invite your attention to something that happens in coding. The code contains all the information of the original message in humanly readable format, whatever message. For example, I want to say that something happened somewhere. Okay, I'm going to I want to send a message to someone that I'm coming to his home, but I don't want anybody else to understand that message, so I will code it. So the message that I want to convey is equally there in the code, but it is not in a format readable by anyone else. That is how we keep it a secret, right? So it will not be readable by a human being or a computer without the proper mechanism to decrypt it. In other words, we need a mechanism, we need a methodology. A code, what is a code? A code or a cipher is an algorithm for performing encryption and or decryption, a series of well-defined steps that can be followed as a procedure. So what are the procedures in academic writing and research? What are the procedures? Now, I'm going to take you through proposals, abstracts, full papers, all these things here. The procedures involved. Now, most things in life begin with an advertisement, a marriage advertisement. Most things in life begin with a proposal. You propose a girl, and that is the beginning. So interestingly, proposals in life are connected with abstract concepts. Like, right, when you think of proposing a girl, the concepts you have in your mind or whatever prompts you, things like love, honor, chivalry, beauty. What are these? These are abstract concepts. And let me tell you, similarly, research proposals are also analogous to and connected with the abstract. When we write a research paper, we will write the abstract, right? Yeah, the other meaning of abstract. There is something abstract about research as well. Here I will be focusing on writing the abstract in research. So how can we write an abstract? I don't take you into a lot of theoretical detail. I want to give you some practical tips and guidelines and tricks by which you can write a successful abstract. Since we have to cover a lot of things, I won't be delving a lot or dwelling a lot in about the abstract. So consider the abstract as the advertisement to your article. It is the advertisement. What are you advertising? We don't usually think of it as an advertisement, but let me tell you, it is an advertisement. What sort of an advertisement? To your article. You are telling your prospective reader what you did or what you are going to do, and you are going to highlight the key findings. In a way, you are seducing your reader, you are tempting your reader. My dear reader, see, I have something interesting to say. Come on, read my full paper, my abstract. So my abstract should convince my reader to read my abstract, read my full paper, and that is where the trick lies. And what are the things that we should include in the abstract? People write good abstracts People write very good abstracts, but certain things are generally lacking. When I sit and as the chief editor of a journal, or on the editorial board of various journals, I find these things happening with abstract submissions. Certain key elements will be missing. So what are the unavoidable elements in an abstract? First and foremost, there must be a problem statement or a thesis statement in your abstract. It should mention your thesis question. What is the question that your paper, that your presentation is trying to answer? This paper attempts to. That sort of a sentence should be there. This research paper attempts to look at such and such things. That sort of a sentence is inevitable in any research paper. Then, so I mean in any abstract. So the problem statement. Second thing, indication of the methodology. That is very important. So how are you going to do it? Keep it simple. How are you going to do it? How will you collect your data? How will you process your data? How will you interpret your data? What is the methodology? We speak about different things. We speak about qualitative, quantitative, this approach, that approach. But in simple words, how are you going to do it? I will do this using such and such tricks and methods. I will do this using this methodology. That is important. That is important. What are you going to do? How are you going to do this? These two things should be there in the abstract. Then the third thing, the main findings of your study should be there in the abstract. Now there is a question. Sometimes we write the abstract before we write our full paper. You are sending the abstract before doing the research. For example, for a conference, they ask you to send the abstract first, and then they will give you 2-3 weeks more to submit the full paper. So you don't fully do your research when you submit your abstract. So how can we do that? How can we summarize the main findings in the abstract? See, findings can be about what you expect to find out as well. It needn't be 100%. You needn't be 100% sure as to what exactly your findings will be. Instead, you should say something about how your findings will be. So it will be like this or like that, or it will be arrived at using this or using that. So something about the main findings. If your research is not complete, and if your research is complete and your abstract is the summary of your research, then definitely it should include the main findings. So 3 things: problem statement, indication of methodology, main findings, and finally there must be a conclusion as well. A very brief 1-sentence conclusion as well to the abstract. So conclusion should not be something like I conclude that once I complete my abstract, my life will be more beautiful. I read it somewhere in WhatsApp yesterday. So that is not the kind of conclusion. The conclusion should be the conclusion to your thesis, conclusion to your problem statement. That is what you should give in the abstract. If these 4 things are there in the abstract, there is no reason why your abstract is not a good one, because it has all the necessary ingredients. And hence, since there are problems with findings when you don't do the research before you submit your abstract, I would always recommend that preferably write the abstract only after you write the full paper. This is very important. I know sometimes we have to, we are pressed for time, we have to write the abstract before we write the full paper. Yes, but if at all possible, write your abstract after you write the full paper, so that you will have more freedom. Your research may take on a different course than what you expected in the beginning. So to factor in all these variables, the best thing to do is to write your abstract after you write your full paper. That is one simple thing. Then avoid in your abstract, avoid using jargon, extremely technical vocabulary, common spoken WhatsApp language. All these things should be avoided in an abstract. Unnecessary introductions should not be there. 90% of the abstract is an introduction. So if my research is on finding out a medicine for corona, then my abstract, if I have 300 words, 270 words will be about corona, how many countries are affected, how many people are affected, then what are the symptoms, things that that was a question, but I missed it. Thesis should begin with a thesis statement. Not exactly, there are no hard and fast rules, but what I have found, what is acceptable in the, research methodology or the submission guidelines of reputed universities, they tell you that your thesis statement should be mentioned at the end of your introduction. This is what I usually find. So usually thesis statement, it is differently worded as well. Some call it problem statement, some call it thesis statement, some call it the research question. I would say, there are minor differences, but more or less these things mean the same, and it is ideal to present it at the beginning, before your methodology and before your literature review as well. But then sometimes it is advisable to write your problem statement or thesis statement at the end of your literature review part as well. Why? Because it is from the literature review that we get a firm idea about the research gap that is there. So the literature review convinces the reader that there is a research gap. So in a full paper, I would say the thesis statement should sometimes be before literature review and sometimes be after literature review, but not anyway long after the full paper has proceeded. No, the thesis statement should be somewhere in the beginning, definitely. Okay, thank you for the question. Then so unnecessary introductions are to be avoided. Such long introductions about corona, how many people are affected, then how my grandfather was affected by corona and how he got healed, and then what happened at my home, all those sort of things are unnecessary in an abstract. Even in a full paper these are unnecessary, but what I am saying is there needn't be a lot of introduction to an abstract. One or two sentences, I will come to that. So how to write, you don't have to write a lot of introduction, and uncommon abbreviations should not be used. For example, you can use an abbreviation like DNA because it is common, people know what is DNA, but don't use abbreviations that people don't usually understand. Technical, very technical abbreviations that is not commonly understood must not be used. The thing with language, ultimate thing that I can say with language is you must be accurate and specific in your abstract, and a clear abstract will strongly influence whether your work is further considered for publication, for anything. Whether if your work is to be considered, your abstract should be spotless, it should be blemish free, it should be good. So it is very important to have a good abstract. We all think, the general perception is that it is the full paper is the most important thing, but without the abstract there is going to be no full paper most of the times, because it is based on the abstract that people decide whether your paper should be accepted or rejected, whether you should be given a chance to submit your paper. And last thing about abstract, a practical instruction again: follow the recommended word limit. Most call for papers will have a recommendation. Okay, it should be, the abstract should be maximum 300 words, maximum 200 words. Don't keep it at the maximum limit like 200, 119. Be brief as well. It should be brief. An abstract is not meant to be long. It should be brief. So follow the word limit. Don't exceed the word limit at any cost. And I would say it is okay to be a little less than a little more, especially when it comes to online journals, because they have space constraints, and if you exceed the word limit by even a sentence, even 5 words, they may have a problem publishing it because of the word limit constraints, especially with e-journals, e-publications. So always be under the word limit, never be over the word limit. So these are the things about the abstract. Now about the full paper, what is the general structure of a full research paper? First, we need a title. No doubt about that. We need a title. The title should be in bold. The name of books should be in italics, the basic things, but don't use full capitalization. Full caps is a big no in research writing. Full capitalization is a big no. I find many people writing the heading in bold. Bold is fine, bold font is fine, but not full caps. Full caps is not accepted. Full capitalization is not acceptable. So unless specified, some journals may sometimes ask you to write it in full caps, then no problem. But if it is not specified like that, the title should be the key content words the first letter of the content words should be capitalized, the rest should be in small letter. Then the title should be followed by the name and designation of the author and the co-authors. The name and designation should be there. Maximum detail, whatever the call for paper says, but if it doesn't say much, at least your name, full name, Mr., Mrs., your whatever it is, title, then your designation, your institution, minimum this many details should be provided, followed by the abstract. Sometimes you have to follow that by the abstract, otherwise you don't have to. And if there is an abstract, the abstract will be followed by a small list of keywords. Limit it to 5 to 8. Don't go beyond 8 keywords, and don't give just 1 or 2 keywords either. So, and keywords should not be sentences. Introduction, some people write keywords like investigation, examination, analysis. No, those are not keywords. Keywords, what your research is about, the basic things, the most important things should be mentioned as keywords, and in mostly as proper nouns in the keywords list. That is followed by your full paper. The full paper begins with an introduction, and I would divide the introduction in a full paper into 3 parts. First one, you have to establish the broad category. You can make generalizations, you can review previous research. For example, a sentence like the 21st century witnessed a massive rise in population, or the 21st century witnessed the arrival of COVID-19, which dealt a massive blow to the economic situation all over the world. A broad generalized statement. So that is the first part. Then second part of the introduction should be establishing the narrow subcategory. Come narrower. It's like this. Come narrow down. So narrow it down to your subcategory. So counter claims. So you are saying that some people in previous research have said this, but I have something else to say. You have to indicate the research gap. You have to raise the research question. For example, you can use sentences like existing research has done this and this, but it has failed to. And that is where your research comes into the picture. Or you can say something like, however, so much research has been done into this area about corona, about the impact of corona and on economic conditions. However, it remains unclear as to whether corona affects people from different sections of the society differently, or there aren't sufficient research to prove that corona affects women more than men. Something else. I'm just giving some examples. So some way you have to narrow it down to your subcategory. That is the second part of your introduction. And the third part of your introduction should present the purpose of the study. This study aims to. This is the sentence, we can use it using different synonyms, but the basic idea is this. This paper attempts to, this paper makes a foray into, this paper delves into, this paper tries to put in perspective, try, strive, attempt, effort, aim, all these words. Announcing the present study, its principal findings, indicating the structure of the study. That is the third part of the introduction. Now, After, there can be minor changes depending on your topic. It is not a, I'm not giving you a hard and fast rule, and I always believe that different research papers will have different requirements. So this is not a hard and fast rule. This is a general idea about how your full paper should look like. Secondly, there should be a literature review. I'm not going into the details. The literature review should be followed by the methodology, the process of data collection, the techniques for data analysis, theoretical structure, how you apply a particular theory, how you apply a particular model. This methodology should follow literature review. For example, it will include sentences like the data for this study was collected by interviewing various participants from India, or the data for this study was collected by testing the blood samples of people who were affected by corona, some sort of thing. So how you collected the data, or how you go about with your research, that is the methodology. Then the next major part, so introduction, literature review, methodology, and then comes the results. What are the results of your study? So based on this study, we can show this, we have found out this, you have found out the results, certain results. So the red blood cells are affected, or the white blood cells are not affected, or whatever your finding is, your results, not findings, the results of the methodology should be given next. And don't think that after results it should be conclusion. Most people make this mistake, especially budding researchers. They have good findings, they have good results, they do the research wonderfully well, but something else is missing in between. What is it? The discussion. You have to interpret your research. And this is very important in a research paper. All of these are important, but you should not avoid this part. Once you reach the results, you generally think that in an examination you get the results and everything is fine. Then you buy the certificate and go. But that is not the case with the research paper. You get the results and then you start your discussion. So the discussion part can be divided further into 3 parts: the introduction, the evaluation, and the conclusion of the discussion. So what is the introduction? You should review the findings, you should discuss the outcomes, you should make a statement, you should stake a claim. The findings of this study clearly illustrate that the findings, based on the results of this study, it can be safely concluded that. Then there should be an evaluation. Why this happened? Analysis, explanation, state the implications. So what does this mean? So you can use sentences like, one explanation for this is, or one reason I can find, or one reason for such a negative data, such a negative result is, or another reason is. And then you have to give the implications. So what this implies is that women have to be more careful with corona than men, or men have to be more careful with corona than men. So these kind of implications have to be mentioned. And finally, the discussion part should have a conclusion. And here we are not concluding the research, the discussion is concluded. How will you conclude the discussion? You have to speak about the limitations of the study. For example, use sentences like, this study was limited by, or the scope of the study limited so that this much only could be done. So this could be, so you can give recommendations also. Further, future researchers can look into such and such aspects of the research and make conclusions. So these are, this study is over, but future scope for future research. So that is the last part of the discussion. And then come to the last part of your full paper. And what is it? It is the conclusion. In the conclusion, don't mention anything new, but the conclusion is not so thank you so much for your patient listening, or not that sort of a statement. Thank you so much for reading this article. I am very happy. It was very difficult for me to do this, but I am happy that I could do it very fruitfully. Thank you so much. No, that is not the conclusion. You have to conclude your full paper. You have to conclude your findings, so that reading the conclusion, a person should understand what this study has done, or has this study achieved its objectives. That should be clearly understood from the conclusion of your thesis. And finally, once the full paper is complete, there should be a reference list, a bibliography or a works cited list. That should be a detailed works cited or reference or bibliography should be there. There is minor difference between this. If you have doubts, you can ask me at the question session. In the interaction section, I will explain. Then what are now once we have completed writing our article, we have written the full paper, abstract, we have written the full paper as well with the bibliography, everything is ready. Now what are the things that you have to ensure before submitting your article to a journal? First thing, very important but very practical thing, simple thing that we sometimes forget: follow the submission guidelines verbatim. Each journal will have its own submission guidelines. It will say you use this font, you use this font size, you should write it like this, you should not use endnote, you should use works cited, you should use reference. There will be a list of guidelines, submission guidelines. Go through the guidelines and study it and make sure that you have followed all the guidelines pakka. There is no exception to that. You have to do it perfectly. The submission guidelines should be followed verbatim. There is no okay, Ranjan Prasad, PPT. Are you asking about my PPT or whether it is necessary to prepare a PPT? PPT is not a must. I don't have a PPT for this presentation, for this lecture. I don't have a PPT, but I will give you some notes regarding what I am saying. The main points I will give it to the organizers and they will share it with you. Now, if you asked about PPT as an option, as something, hello? Hello? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Did I disconnect?
yes, sir.
Did I disconnect for a moment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it doesn't matter. So what I was saying, somebody asked about the PPT. So PPT is not a must. PPT presentations are not a must. For example, usually PPT comes into the picture when you are submitting for a conference, right? A paper for conference. So is PPT a must? If the conference organizers say it is a must, it is a must. But I don't believe that they should say like that a PPT is must. It should be optional. And personally, I don't like PPT because if the power is lost, the point is also lost. I would like to speak spontaneously, but different people have different ways of looking at things. So it is optional, but it is not a must. That much only I can say. So what are the things to ensure before submitting? So first thing that, then second thing, this is a very silly rule, silly thing, but this is something that will prevent your article from being accepted. I tell this to students everywhere. Whenever I give a lecture, I say this, but this is very important. 2-3 very important things. One, comma, full stop and semicolon rules. There are some very important rules. The problem is, if these rules are not observed, the software, most journals have software through which they will run your paper, and that software will show it as error, and because of that your paper can be rejected even before it is taken to the review board. So the simple idea is this: don't put a space before a comma or a full stop or a semicolon or a colon. Okay, don't put a space before these things, but you must put a space, single space, after a comma, after a full stop, after a semicolon, after a colon. Always remember that there should be a space after, but before these things there shouldn't be a space. It's very important. Then don't press the enter key. Rituparna, we can discuss that in the question session. You can ask it later. Let me complete this. No continuous enter key. For example, we have written the title, then we feel that okay, the paper should begin a little at the bottom. So what will we do? Enter, 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 enter. Don't do that. That is an error. Don't use the enter key more than once. Consecutively. Don't use the enter key more than once. Never press the space bar twice or even more. Only one space between two words. Never use the space bar continuously. No, that is an error. So these simple things are very important, and Then no colons after subheadings. Some I don't usually encourage a lot of subheadings, but some people, especially in science papers, we find a lot of subheadings. It happens. In literature papers, in arts and humanities, we have less titles and more, descriptive type of things. But in what I was saying, the question confused me. I forgot what I was saying. So, okay, subheadings. So, after the subheading, there shouldn't be a colon. This is what I wanted to say. If you use a subheading, don't use a colon after that if you are beginning the sentence in the next line. But use a colon if you are continuing the sentence in that line itself. The titles of books should be in italics. No bold. Bold font should not be used except in the titles and subtitles of your full paper. Never use the underline anywhere in your research paper. I know that in science papers maybe you need it for some for putting some formula or something. You can use, but otherwise never use the underline option on Microsoft Word anywhere in your research paper, unless the organizers or the CFP mentions that explicitly, that you should underline the title. Then follow the same citation style right through. If you are following MLA style, follow it from the beginning to the very end. Same style. If you are using APA, Harvard, whichever you are using, follow the same citation style right through your paper. Under no circumstance your font size should be over 14. Don't manipulate your margins to increase the page number. So the book, it has to be 10 pages. So I will just ding 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 ding, put the margins left, put the margins right, and then my paper increases its page number. Don't you do that. Any type of such manipulation is considered as not proper. Don't manipulate. Bibliography should not be more than 30% of the document. This is very important. Bibliography should not be more than 30, or the works cited at the end you give a works cited list. It should not be at any cost more than 30% of the full document. Then quotations also should not be more than 30% of the full document. For arts and humanities, don't write the names of too many people as collaborators or co-authors, because it doesn't make sense in arts and humanities subjects for people to collaborate on a literary or such a paper. In sciences we need collaborations and co-authors, but in arts and humanities maximum 2 or 3, not more than 3 at any cost. Self-citations should be avoided at all cost, if at all possible. Unless you are a great author who has done some extraordinary research and it is your you are continuing your research, self-citations should be avoided. And it is plagiarism, just quoting yourself without any citation is plagiarism, and self-citation is largely discouraged. And one more thing, publishing your creative works in journals. Most people do this. Now there is a big trend to publish poetry and quotations, small quotations in journals, and we can say that it is a journal publication. No, only to have a publication against your name for academic purposes, for CAS, for any kind of interviews, you need to have published a research paper itself in a journal. Nothing else will do. Whether it is a poem or a play or a quotation, it will not do. You have to write a research paper and publish it in a journal to have that publication against your name. However, I am not discouraging other publications. You should publish poetry, but not in journals. You can publish it in poetry journals, but not in these journals, Scopus listed or such UGC care listed journals that will take money from you for publishing your poem. No, don't pay money and do that. So all sort of, but still, all sort of publications are good and enrich you as a creative artist. No doubt about that. And one very practical suggestion, something that most people find confusing: don't save, when you are sending your paper, don't save it and send it as a docx document. Latest versions of Microsoft Word is docx. Some people send it as PDF. Don't send it as PDF. Don't send it as docx. always save your document as a Word .doc document, not docx, doc document. For that, just click save as and then give the option Word 97 2003 document, and then it will save as a .doc document. It is important because docx documents, when it is read in some devices, docx documents tend to have some problems with its formatting. Then docx .doc and .docx. .doc is the right one. If you have doubts, you can ask later. Then let us move to plagiarism. And I know you have heard a lot about plagiarism. What is plagiarism? What are the types of plagiarism? I am not going to tell you anything of the sort. I am going to tell you about certain myths about plagiarism in our country that most people have. First myth, that the university or the UGC permits 10% or 15% or 20% plagiarism. No. Now everybody will, so many people will have doubts, but that is not correct. Nobody permits plagiarism. UGC doesn't permit plagiarism. My university, your university, this university, that university, no university permits plagiarism. The thing is, they permit certain, give some exemption, 15% exemption, because you are using a software like Turnitin or Urkund to find out the similarity percent. So this 10% is not plagiarism. 10% similarity or 15% similarity is okay because of the technical problems with the software. That is why, and certain things are shown as plagiarized, though we don't explicitly, there is no plagiarism. That is why that margin is given. It is a margin, but it is not a permission to plagiarize. Please understand that. Second one, that people think that Grammarly can be used for plagiarism detection. No, Grammarly is not the software for plagiarism detection. It is used by some people for improving their grammar, but even that, I am quite circumspect about the capacity of Grammarly. I find most people making more mistakes using Grammarly and losing their language skills by using Grammarly, but it's up to you. But don't use it for plagiarism detection. Then another myth in India, that there is nothing wrong with self-plagiarism. And a reader in English literature, a professor who is a supervisor and who has supervised more than 30 people, he told me that it is perfectly okay to write whatever you have written in your previous papers. Nobody is going to question. No, it is wrong. It is wrong. Self-plagiarism is wrong. And in 2020, I guess UGC came out with a notification saying, giving detailed guidelines on self-plagiarism. So it is not okay. Then another misconception about plagiarism among people, it is this, that anti-plagiarism software can remove plagiarism. We hear a lot about anti-plagiarism software like Plagiarism Checker or Turnitin or Urkund. People buy and use these software under the presumption that these software can help remove plagiarism. No, this software cannot remove plagiarism. They can tell you how much percentage plagiarism is there in your document, but it cannot remove plagiarism. Yeah, it helps you remove plagiarism because it shows you that such and such things in your document are plagiarized, so that you yourself can manually correct it. That is the only thing. Then another misconception, another myth among researchers in India is that there is no plagiarism if I paraphrase something and then credit the source in the bibliography, in the reference. So I have taken something and I am not saying it is my own. See, what is plagiarism? It is saying something as my own. No, I haven't plagiarized. I have taken something from this person and I have, I have paraphrased it. There I haven't mentioned anything. Instead, at the end in the reference section, I have mentioned very clearly about the reference. I have given this particular author, he has written such an article, all those things I have given in the reference section. So it is not plagiarism. No. Even if things are provided in the bibliography or in the reference or works cited section, things can be plagiarized. Things are considered plagiarized if you don't give in-text citation. So just because you have given reference, it doesn't mean that you are safe free from plagiarism. No. Then, last myth that I want to talk to you is that people believe that once I have decided a topic for PhD, I should publish papers related to that topic only, and all those papers I can copy and paste into my PhD. This is a common thing that we encounter, right? We have to publish certain papers before we can submit our thesis. And suppose I published 3 papers in some very reputed journals I published. Now, why can't I use this in my thesis? No, my dear friends, it is not possible. It will come under self-plagiarism. It will come under self-plagiarism. You cannot do that. You cannot copy and paste from your paper, even if it is your paper, even if it is done in connection with your PhD, it cannot be done. Rather, what you should do, and I think it must be done, I am not sure whether all universities insist that, but what must be done is at the end of your PhD, in the annexer, in the appendix, after the bibliography and all, in the annexer, you can give these papers that you have published in connection with your thesis. And don't think that it should always be completely connected with that particular topic only. You can take related topics as well. And what are the tips to avoid plagiarism? I would say be honest. Don't plagiarize knowingly, and to know whether there are unknowingly maybe we have plagiarized. You have taken something you may not have noticed. So there are so many things to do, and I am not going into those details, but one thing that you need to do is you have to cross verify your quotations and references and citations. Cross verify and give it to 2 or 3 of your friends. Ask them to just check whether my citations are fine, whether I have cited everything properly. So give proper citation to everything you have taken from anybody else, from any other source. So that is the best way to avoid plagiarism. And then secondly, most importantly, take a plagiarism report from Turnitin or Orkun. These are the only things that I will recommend. So definitely, Vaishali, you can publish papers on subjects related to your PhD topic. It needn't necessarily be, for example, if you have taken Salman Rushdie, if you have taken the novels of Salman Rushdie for a post-colonial analysis in your research paper, in your PhD, you can do papers on post-colonialism related themes. Any other writer from post-colonialism, no problem. But the catch is you have to ask your supervisor. Your supervisor will be able to give you, and if your supervisor doesn't permit, that is going to be a problem. So take a plagiarism report to ensure originality. That is very important. Then codes. What are the codes? When you speak about coding, code cracking tools simplify the process of cracking codes, right? There are password cracking software out there in the internet, password hacking tools. So these tools will help simplify your process of decryption in coding. Similarly, in research also we have digital tools that help simplify our research process. The first and the most often referred thing is reference management softwares, reference management tools that help scholars to create and manage their list of references. Most such tools are designed to organize citations in a specific format, in MLA, in APA, whichever style you want, it will organize your citations in that particular format. And I will recommend just two such reference management tools, and those are Mendeley and Zotero. Zotero. Mendeley, 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 and Zotero, Zotero. So Mendeley is the best one. It is a free reference manager and academic software that can help you organize your research, collaborate with others online, discover the latest research. You can create your own profile, upload papers, publicize your research. So much can be done on Mendeley. So it is very good. Zotero is also similar one. It can be used. Apart from these, there are citation generators and citation machines available on the internet. You need to give your details and it will give the citation to you. But personally, I would tell you this: verify manually before you entering anything, because all these softwares make mistakes once in a while, maybe because of the way we have entered things, but verify manually. And the best thing is to study the citation rules on your own rather than rely a lot on these tools. But yeah, using the tools is fine, but use it as an assistant only. That shouldn't be your manager. Reference management doesn't mean they can manage you. You should manage them. Then what not to use, I spoke about Grammarly. Another thing that I would not recommend anyone to use is paraphrasing software. And something like by the name Quillbot is very famous. Many people are using it and now they are escaping without being caught. But I tell you, this is not fair. This is dishonesty. And don't use such paraphrasing software. It is unethical. I would consider that unethical. The UGC hasn't said anything about it so far, but I would say it is completely unethical to use a paraphrasing software. And many free softwares you find online, don't use those things. If you submit your article in such free software, what will happen? It may get published elsewhere. So be careful. Don't use all the free software out there for paraphrasing for this and that matter, because I want to give you this word of caution. You know what? So many people, our elder generation, people who are now in their 90 or hundreds, so that generation, when digitalization came, when the internet and digitalization of books came, what happened was many established professors, even a vice chancellor from a very reputed university, all these people were caught for plagiarism. Why? They had plagiarized earlier, but because there was no way to find out before internet, they were not caught. So there will come a time, I believe that there will come a time when technology develops even further to find out whether you have used these paraphrasing softwares or other free softwares for your, do what is ethical, but don't do unethical things. Be honest. Let us be honest about everything that we do in research. Whatever is allowed you can use, but don't use things that are improper, because you may be find out. I will say you will be find out. You will be find out because technology is evolving very rapidly, that we will get found out very quickly. That is my word of caution. And what are the tools and softwares things we should have? I would say that we need to have a LinkedIn account because it is a professional networking. We should have a ResearchGate, Google Scholar, Academia, whichever you prefer. Use any one of them. ResearchGate is free. I always recommend ResearchGate, but Google Scholar and Academia are equally fine, though not so vast. And you should have an institutional email address. So ask your institution for an institutional email address. It is very important because without that you cannot get so many things. You cannot get access to ResearchGate and such applications. And without institutional email address, it is increasingly difficult to apply for grants from bodies like UGC. You need an institutional email address to do that. And then another thing you must have, I would say, if you are doing PhD, at least you should have access to either Turnitin or Urkund. Now, these software, Urkund is available only for institutions and Turnitin is a very expensive software. So I don't say that you should buy this software. Different versions of subsidized versions are available, but I don't say you should buy it. But if you are a serious researcher doing your PhD, have an account on Turnitin because it is very important. Otherwise, there is every chance that your thesis may get stolen when you give it to someone for checking plagiarism, because our society is very bad. Let us be honest about it. There is no integrity in anyone. You cannot trust your supervisor also. You give it to your supervisor and the supervisor may sell it to another person. It happened in a university in Uttar Pradesh very recently. So these things can happen. I understand that some people want to give me so much feedback. People are asking for feedback. Never mind. It happens with every conference. So They will send you the feedback, my dear friend. Don't worry about the feedback. Okay. Then access to InflipNet. This is very important. Your institution should have access to InflipNet. Just 5,000 rupees they have to spend if it is UGC connected, and 12F and 2B certificates are there, means just 5,000 rupees a year for the institution, otherwise 35,000 rupees private institutions. And it's a vast reservoir of research materials for researchers, so you should have InflipNet access. Then ORCID ID, I will speak about 3 IDs. ORCID ID, ORCID Open Researcher and Contributor ID. It is a good ID to have. It will analyze you from various angles. It is an identifier that distinguishes you from other researchers with similar name, 16-digit. So try to have an ORCID ID. It is free. You can just create an ORCID ID at orcid.org. Go to register. You can create your unique ORCID ID. And another one is a researcher ID that is used in PubLaunch, Web of Science and Insights. That is another ID that you can have. That can also be had used www.researcherid.com, and there you have an option for self-registration. And the final one is the Scopus Author ID. The Scopus Author ID. Now, this is a controversial thing, because what is Scopus Author ID? It is an identifier that is used in the database Scopus. You know that. It is assigned automatically to every author who, after he publishes at least an article in the index of Scopus. If you have an article indexed in Scopus, you will have a Scopus Author ID. But you must have published an article in Scopus, and the problem is very strange. The problem is it is very difficult to get published in Scopus even if you have good quality. That is where I have difference of opinion with Scopus. Even if you are good quality researcher, even if you do exemplary research, it doesn't guarantee that you can publish in Scopus. Yeah, I know that most universities, most people are insisting that you should publish in Scopus. But what is the problem? Even if you are a quality researcher, if you don't have money, you cannot publish in Scopus. How much are they asking? Minimum of 5,000, 10,000. UGC care listed journals are asking 5,000. Scopus is starting with 10,000 and 15,000. I know 50,000 people have spent 50,000, 1,50,000. A computer teacher from Tamil Nadu recently paid 1,50,000 because she had to publish an article in a Scopus journal before she could submit her thesis. How cruel is that? Our topic, our idea, we are submitting and we are publishing, and for that we have to pay this much money. Isn't it inhuman? So there is such an ID. That is all I would say. I wouldn't say that Scopus ID is a must. Yes, universities say that, but ask your universities, what is the ethics in making people pay so much of money to get their article published? It is like going to a dentist for getting your tooth extracted. The dentist gets the tooth and then you have to give him money also. And that is the case with Scopus. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about impact factor and H index. I think I will give you a very brief couple of things. Impact factor is about a journal. Impact factor is a scientific index calculated by Clarivate. Web of Science, Clarivate Analytics, Web of Science, that reflects the yearly average of the number of citations of articles published in the last 2 years in a given journal. You can Google it and find out all these things, but you have to understand what impact factor is. And journals with high impact factor are valued higher and better than journals with less impact factor. I will come to citation score and all. Whereas impact factor is about journals and articles, H index is about the author. This also As per H index, for example, suppose I have done 20 years of research, and suppose my H index is 20. It means that I am a good researcher. Suppose my H index is 40. It means that I am an excellent researcher. Suppose my H index is 60. it means that I am an exceptional, extraordinary researcher. The advantage of H index is that it combines productivity, number of papers, plus impact, the number of citations that you get. This is the idea. And I know you know about how to calculate. For example, H index is calculated by counting the number of publications you have for which you have been cited by other researchers at least that same number of times. I will give an example. If my H index is 5, suppose my H index is 5, it is not. I don't have an H index, 0. If my H index is 5, it means that I have published at least 5 papers that have each been cited 5 times by other researchers in my area of research. This is H index. Now, the problem with impact factor and H index is there is a lot of criticism about impact factor, that it is manipulated, that people do a lot of manipulative practices to get this impact factor. A lot of problems are there. And secondly, the problem with impact factor and H index, especially for arts and humanities, please understand this, impact factor and H index don't apply for arts and humanities researchers. Why? Because these people have mentioned very clearly it is based on citation, and citation is not the way, citation of articles is not the way research is carried out in arts and humanities. That is why arts and humanities cannot have a lot of impact factor or H index, and that is why it is wrong to ask researchers from arts and humanities to publish in journals with high impact factor. This is a mistake. This is a mistake. Yes, in sciences, H index and impact factor very important. In social sciences also, because there is a lot of work happening through researches and journals, not in arts and humanities, at least for the time being. And then finally, to understand which are good journals and bad journals, I would ask every one of you to do these 2 things. And with this I will try to wind up. When it comes to finding out the right journal to publish, first thing, create an ID in UGC Care website. Go to ugccare.universitypune.ac.in, and there every one of us can create a free account, login ID and password, and then you can check for yourself whether a journal is there in UGC Care list or not. All things are very simple there. That is one thing. UGC Care list is it is not perfect, but it is becoming perfect gradually. Yeah, there are many good journals that are not there in UGC Care list, and there are some very poor journals that are there in UGC Care list, because the human element is always there. And the second thing I would suggest is predatoryjournals.com/journals. There also you can find a list of predatory journals, and it is a very trustworthy list. I have always referred to that to know whether a journal is trustworthy. And then there are some practical tips that you can have to find whether a journal is fake or predatory. I can give you a lot of tips, but due to time constraints, I'm winding up. So my suggestion for you is, have a lot of patience, be ready to make mistakes while doing research, trust yourself, have confidence, understand that research is at once an art and a science. Above all, use common sense. Use your common sense. Don't get trapped. Use your common sense. There are some basic rules, but there are no hard and fast rules regarding how to do it. I will tell you a small story. You have heard this story in different other contexts, and with that I am winding up. So, an illiterate dad and his son, who had a PhD in astronomy, both of them went trekking. They went camping. They unpacked and set up their tent. After dinner, they went to sleep. A few hours later, the dad woke up and he saw the stars. He was looking at the stars. Very poetic scene. Now, he woke up his son and asked him, "What do you see?" The son said, It's an astronomic spectacle. Astronomically, it tells you that there are thousands of galaxies out there. And his father interrupted and told him, "You idiot, someone has stolen our tent. That is why we were sleeping under the tent and now we are seeing the stars. It means that someone has stolen the tent." Lack of common sense. It's a joke. Of course, it's a joke. And we find different versions of this joke. The bride who put the glass on the stove, or the son who put rice in water. Lot of different versions of this joke are available, and we all enjoy such jokes. But the thing is, we are researchers, but be researchers with some common sense, because common sense is very uncommon these days. It is very important to have common sense these days, because there are so many traps out there in the research field. Hope I have helped you crack some codes of research. Hope I haven't cracked your brain. So that is it. Thank you for your patient listening. Now you may have a lot of doubts. There were a lot of doubts, and some people are very interested in having feedback. That can be provided now itself, no issues. If the organizers are happy, they can provide the feedback. Meanwhile, I will be happy to take questions. Since there are so many questions, I will take the questions definitely. Time doesn't matter. Whatever I know, I will share with you. So thank you so much.
Hello, sir. Can we ask verbally questions, if you allow, or should I have to write?
No, you can ask me. You can ask me. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you very much. It was really a dense presentation, sir, and we're very much enriched. So I'm having a couple of questions. Would you please briefly help me with that? Yes, I actually followed in between while you were talking about the structure of the research paper. So I just need to know what will follow methodology. I mean, I have written the discussion portion. So what is there between methodology and discussion part?
Well, what is your subject, if I can ask?
Sir, my subject English literature.
Okay. The problem is, I gave a broad idea about research because our audience consists of people from different research areas. Now, when it comes to English literature, after the methodology part, you may have to give something like the theoretical underpinnings, or what is the theory that you are using. For example, if you are using deconstruction as a methodology, as a tool for your research, you are doing a deconstructive reading. After your methodology, you may have to explain something about deconstruction as well, or how you are going to exactly apply deconstruction to your research, or what are the basic assumptions about research regarding deconstruction. So the thing is that it is a kind of a gray area, I would say, because in sciences they have what you call things like hypothesis. We have to bring things like hypothesis, but in arts and humanities we rarely have hypothesis, right? We rarely have hypothesis, and what we usually need is to apply a theory or apply a particular method of reading. And so after methodology, most usually before the discussion part, we may have to speak something about the theoretical underpinnings of the study as well. Anyway, literature review would be over by then. Methodology, and after methodology, ideally we can speak about the theory part, or you can extend your methodology discussion in such a way that while discussing your methodology, you can speak about the theoretical aspects as well, and then you can go to the discussion and the findings. So in literature research, maybe the discussion part that we put at the end, that discussion part may come a little earlier after the methodology part. This is what I feel. And maybe we need two discussion parts, one after the methodology part and one after our results, because we may not always be doing quantitative research. It will be qualitative research, and in qualitative research, so many things that are there in quantitative research are not applicable. That is why we may need a couple of discussion parts within the full paper. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. My next question is, there were some portion where you were talking about the using of column in a research paper. So we should avoid using column everywhere. I mean,
Colon or
not
column? Colon.
column.
I was speaking about colon, COLON, full colon, dots, two dots like this, dots, colon. What I was saying was, when you are using a subtitle or a full title, after that, if you are beginning the next sentence in the next line, then don't use a colon. Okay. If you are continuing with the sentence, that line itself, then you can use a colon. For example, you are writing a word like conclusion, and then you put a colon, and then you begin the next line. It is wrong. But if you are writing conclusion and colon, and then you are continuing, so from this research we find such and such things, then you can use the colon. I am not speaking, maybe it was the problem with my
Yes,
pronunciation.
column. Yes, not column.
Okay.
I heard it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. And there are two more questions. That is, yeah. So once it happens that when we have to send some journals for publication, and the journal authority doesn't ask for any plagiarism certificate, but we, from our own interest, often try to check how much our paper are enriched or not. So in that case, say I have just heard, and I'm just trying to verify if that's true or not. If I arrange a certificate for myself, and once I send the paper, if the journal authority again check it for plagiarism, and then should the software show that it's something already.
That is a misconception. Yeah, people, I understand your question. People think that once you can check something on plagiarism software only once, and the software will save it, and then it will be shown as plagiarized later. It happens with certain softwares, certain free softwares out there in the internet. You know, there are different free plagiarism checking softwares, and that is why I told you, don't use free softwares for plagiarism checking. It is untrustworthy. What will happen is, it will be shown as plagiarized because somebody in Africa or America will take your paper and get it published, because you have to upload it for checking plagiarism, right? And they will take it elsewhere. They don't have any ethical guarantee. That is why. But if you use a good plagiarism, anti-plagiarism software like Turnitin or Orkun, you check it 100 times, the result will not change. It will not have any problems. It will not store it anywhere. It is not going to, until it is published somewhere on the internet by somebody, it will not have any such impact. Nothing to worry. You can check it, but check only on trustworthy software. If you check on other software, no guarantee.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. I have understood.
Good
And
afternoon.
Yes,
if
yes.
you
Good
could just-
afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, that's my last question. Yeah.
Carry on.
Could you just please mention some repositories for studying portions like literature review? We have to undergo a thorough reading of the existing kind of studies that have already done by other people.
The best repository is definitely InflipNet. InflipNet
Okay.
and JSTOR. Yeah, JSTOR in InflipNet for literature students, JSTOR. And another one very good website where you have lot of materials available is literariness.org. It is a website done by a very humble professor from Kerala named Nasrullah Mambrol, and he is doing a great service to a lot of people by it's only for literature people, I'm sorry to others. It's a very good website where you will find excellent quality material on almost everything related to literature and literary theory. So literariness.org, literariness, that is the literariness. I will type www.literariness.org. Yeah, this is the website.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Have a
welcome.
nice day.
Yes. Others, please. Someone else was asking. Write the name of the website I have written. Feedback for okay. Yeah, how can we select primary text while writing research proposals? So since we are at such an early stage, how can we select what should be our primary text? You know, your question is basically how can we choose our topic. For that, Glincy, my reply is, what you have to do is you have to read a lot. Now you will say that this is what everyone else is saying, but what should we read? You have to read what you are interested in, because don't do research on something you are not interested in. Read on what you are interested in, and the more you read, the more you will understand. And I would also suggest you to read research papers written by others in the area, so that the bulb will, suddenly there will be a spark somewhere in your brain. So for that to happen, do a lot of reading, not just creative works, but critical works as well. Read a lot of critical materials, criticism, lot of such materials. And then you have to how to choose the primary text based on your interest. I will say based on your interest. If you are interested in a particular genre, say poetry or literature or fiction or short story or travel writing or subaltern literature, Dalit writing, whatever it is, whatever your area of interest is, go to that. And that is the way to go forward. Read a lot, use the library, attend these conferences and seminars, good conferences and seminars, where you will get a lot of links, lot of connections, connecting ideas as to what you can do, how you can do, what are the books, what are the currently discussed ideas, all these things. Good presenters, good resource persons give you a lot of threads to work on. I have observed some excellent resource persons. When you sit and attend their lecture, you have no time but for writing. You have to write everything down, because they are giving so many topics in between. So they will not say this is a topic, but if you are careful, you can find so many topics. Yeah.